I'm honored to invite our third Nobel Prize winner, Professor Schekman. You see, Schekman and Schekman, we have two similar family names, both Nobel Prizes. Normally they don't know each other, nothing related in family tree or something. Different fields of science, nothing related besides the general principles of science in general, but what they link them together, the courage. Professor Schekman will speak about something that is probably, it's a field or a worry of any of academics in their life. Where to publish their research, to publish in a well-known journal where their competitors are already editors or reviewers, and so on and so on. My take on it is that today is very popular, you know, the journals with have high impact factor, which for me is completely, irrelative. It depends where you are. For example, if you publish a paper in a chemical journal, the impact factor might be 10 or something. If you publish a paper in a material journal, the impact factor could be 0.99, Doesn't mean that the material science journal is less popular and less professional than the chemical science. What does it mean is that chemical scientists are 10 times more than material scientists. The more they are, the more they will refer to it. So it's a kind of, we are fooling ourselves here, but that's my take on it. I don't know the content of really the subject, the details of the presentation of Professor Schekman. I wish you good listening to his take on this issue, very important one, and probably we diffuse all the myths around this subject. It will be very interesting. Oh, sorry. I'll guide you, sorry.
Thank you, Florian. Am I on here? Yes. So when Florian contacted me several months ago to come to this meeting, I thought it was a practical joke. Schekman. I thought Schekman receiving the first Schekman Prize, that seemed like a conflict of interest. But he persuaded me that this was a real event, and I'm pleased to be here. I'm a cell biologist and biochemist, so very different than the scholars here in the audience. But the issue that I want to speak about this evening, not about my own science, but about the general issue that faces all scholars in all of the sciences as they seek to publish their most important work. I'm going to start by reviewing briefly the various styles of the scientific journals that we use in our fields, in our various disciplines. And then I'm going to talk about new initiatives in open source or open access publication, and some of the problems that we who favor open access publication face in the challenge to capture the imagination of young scholars who are, for the most part, interested in publishing in very high impact commercial journals. So let me tell you just a little bit about these issues as we face them. So what are the journal categories that interest all of us in all fields of science? There are journals that are subscription-based, that our libraries subscribe to. They are either commercial or scholarly journals published by scientific societies. Some of them are purely subscription-based. Others are open access, which means that you have access to the paper, whether you're a member of an academic community or not. You can go online and you can read the paper without having to pay a fee. And there are some hybrid journals that allow access to certain papers where an author pays an additional fee to provide the community with open access. Another important difference is there are many journals that still have a print format. In fact, many journals still have a print format. Some, but increasingly very few, offer only print format, but increasingly more have an online presence, and some, as a growing body, have only an online presence. In fact, if you ask most young scholars, graduate students and postdocs, they almost never look at a hard copy of a journal. They're always accessing the literature online. This is the future of publication, and journals that rely on a print basis are going to be challenged by the change in the style of publication. There are journals that are private and commercial. There are others that are public, profit-generating operations. For instance, the American Association for the Advancement of Science publishes a very important science magazine. It's a not-for-profit organization, but they use the income that they generate from publishing science magazine to do the good works of that organization. So it is a profit-generating organization. And they're, of course, purely not-for-profit. Typically, the scientific societies publish in a not-for-profit format. Now, another important difference is some of the commercial journals, and principally the journals Nature and Science that we all deal with, are run essentially exclusively by professional editors. These are people who are trained as scientists, but who have a sometimes broader interest in disciplines and are not keen to continue their own experimental careers. They then take positions at these organizations, and they are responsible for making decisions about the papers of active scholars. But most journals are run by scientists who are continue to be active academics. Now, the open access movement began in Britain about 15 years ago with the idea that the public invests in paying for science. They deserve the right to read papers, to see things that they may read about in the newspaper without having to pay an additional fee to have access to these papers. So investigators who have their research supported by the government may publish, for instance, in Science magazine or in Nature magazine, and yet, if you are not a member of an academic community and have access to a site license to those journals, you have to pay an additional fee to have access to those papers, in spite of the fact that you, as a taxpayer, have supported the research that went into these journals. Many of us feel that this is wrong, that the public, having invested in science, deserves the right to be able to see the science, the fruits of our labor and of their investment, and that gave rise to the open access movement. This was popularized principally by an organization that publishes life science papers in several journals. It's called the Public Library of Science, or PLOS. It really had a very important impact in the open access movement. The open access movement has now achieved political support in Europe and the United States. There are several important agencies, including the NIH and the British government, that favor, and the European Commission, that favor the investigators publishing their work in open access journals. Indeed, the NIH now has a firm policy that papers must be readily available to the public at least a year after they're published. And so commercial publishers are having to conform to this new requirement. Well, as a result of this movement, the open access movement, at least in the life sciences, and I'm not certain about in the physical sciences, but in the life sciences, there is a growth in the number of publications that are openly accessible. Nonetheless, at least as of a couple of years ago, it still isn't a majority of papers. So only about 10% of the papers in the life sciences are in an open access journal. So the problem is that the commercial publishers are very active politically in opposing the incursion of the open access movement into the public sphere. They have fought at the federal and local levels to preclude this because they feel that it's a threat to their commercial base. Now, there are other problems with all publications, and this is something I feel very, very strongly about. I was the editor-in-chief of a general science journal called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the PNAS. And I felt that there were things that were seriously wrong with the way that the most important work in the sciences and all sciences was handled. And I thought there was a particular difference in the way that journals that are run by professional editors are handled compared to those journals that are run by active scientists. We've all experienced, all scholars who have published our work have experienced the trauma of having to run through the gauntlet of referees who view their job as finding criticisms of our work. This, of course, is an important feature of all science, that we subject ourselves to anonymous peer review. But in addition, the layer that concerns me, that's imposed by commercial journals, those run by professional editors, is that they rely on the perceived impact of a paper measured by the number of citations that paper will generate. Indeed, journals, as I'll illustrate in some detail, journals at the very high end rely on a number that Florian mentioned called impact factor, which I believe is an inadequate measure of the true scholarly influence of work. It's basically, for those of you who don't know about it, it's a number that computes the total number of citations generated for a journal over a 2-year period. Now, work that's particularly revolutionary tends not to be cited early after the discovery, and so, of course, such papers, though they in the end may be very important, will not contribute to the impact factor of a journal, and therefore these commercial journals, particularly Nature and Science, will avoid publishing such papers because they don't see them as helping the bottom line. So this is an additional, I feel very, very strongly, is an additional problem that we all face in trying to publish creative, original research. So the peer review system, I feel, particularly at journals that are run by professional editors, is broken. We've all, I see somebody applauds there. We've all experienced this. We've all experienced the frustration of having a paper reviewed by a number of referees, several of whom are favorable. It's very often the third referee who is most critical of our work. And now scientists have come out to oppose the tyranny of some journals. Here, an immunologist by the name of Flogen from MIT, peer review of scientific papers in top journals is bogged down by unnecessary demands for extra lab work. He made these comments ironically in Nature, one of the journals that I believe is an offender. Or scholars from UC San Francisco, the stress associated with publishing experimental results can drain much of the joy from practicing science, published in another journal that I believe is guilty in this quest for so-called high-impact papers. Well, as I said, the problem almost always results from one referee who feels very strongly that there's something wrong, and that can sink one's chances for publishing in a high-impact journal. Here, for instance, the evil referee, seen in the movie The Last Days of Hitler, as modified by some comic who said, "It's always the third damn reviewer that screws us over." Well, what to do about this? I think the system really is distorted, and I'm going to give you another example about the way that it can be distorted. The impact factor is such an important influence that postdoctoral fellows in all science fields often make decisions about where they're going to publish their work based on small numeric differences in this phony number, the impact factor. In fact, government agencies rely on the impact factor in calculating the importance of the scholars whose work they evaluate for funding and for promotion. Here's an example of a document that was published by the Chinese Academy of Sciences just last year. Now, you won't be able to read it. I'll interpret it for you. I have several Chinese postdocs who've translated this. According to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, if you win the lottery and publish in these journals, Cell, which is a life science journal, Nature or Science, you will be given basically a cash reward, the equivalent of 33,000 US dollars, not for your research, but for your own spending money. This is basically what I consider a bribe. If you enter the lottery and you happen to win the competition to get into one of these journals, you will be given a cash bribe of 33,000 US dollars. Now, that's bad enough, but as the former editor of the PNAS, I was really deeply offended to learn that a publication in my old journal was only worth 8,000 US dollars. And if you had the misfortune of publishing in a local Chinese journal, the reward was only $100. Now, I make light of this, but imagine the distorting influence on a young scholar who realizes that they can get a cash reward for making their work look perhaps more appealing than it actually is. And we've seen many examples of this kind of distortion. In the life sciences, just this year, in January, some of you may know about this, 2 papers were published in Nature by a young Japanese woman who did her work in the US and then returned to the Riken Institute in Japan. In these 2 sensational papers, she claimed that adult human cells, when exposed to a low pH, would empower them to be turned into a human embryonic stem cell, something that can be done in the laboratory but which requires much more laborious techniques. So imagine having this kind of opportunity where you could take an adult cell and by simply exposing it to low pH, you would convert it into an embryonic stem cell that had the possibility of differentiating into any of the tissues in our body. This was potentially a revolutionary discovery. It made the evening news, it made the front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. It was, frankly, too good to be true. Indeed, it is too good to be true. Within weeks, laboratories around the world attempted and failed to replicate her results. We learned subsequently that images in the papers were duplicates of each other, inverted to give the appearance of different clusters of cells. Indeed, language in the paper was plagiarized from her own publications from years earlier. Now, all journals can be fooled by manipulation of data. No journal editor is ever safe. But I submit that the pressures that we as a scholarly society impose on our young students and fellows is more than some can bear, and they break under that strain, and they do so because certain journals are so restrictive in what they will publish. They restrict the number of pages and papers that they will publish, often because they run a limited print version, and it's more expensive to print more pages, and also because they prey on the vanity of investigators who want their work to be in exclusive venues, and thus they feel that they must, if their career is to succeed, strive, wasting often lots of time and money to achieve this false success of publishing in a journal like Nature or Science. I think this is a distortion. And on October 10th, when I was in Stockholm, I published an editorial in the Guardian newspaper where I announced that I would no longer be publishing in these journals, and I challenged other people to do likewise, because these journals were distorting the scholarship and the value system that we all treasure in our scientific endeavors. Well, one thing that we can do is to try to convince each other, our students, our fellows, our administrators, our government agencies, to move away from the use of this phony number, the impact factor, in evaluating scholarship. A group of us scientific editors, including, I credit the then editor of Science magazine, Bruce Alberts, joined forces together 2 years ago in San Francisco to declare in a Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA San Francisco, you can Google it and find it, a number of points that we wish scholars to embrace. First, that we move away from the use of this phony metric to evaluate the importance of our work. that we devise other means to evaluate scholarship and the merits of it. For example, reading the papers, that would be a good start. And to exploit new tools in the internet to evaluate our work. We had a number of specific recommendations for all groups that are interested in all sciences. We now have over 10,000 investigators and organizations from around the world who have joined forces, and I would urge you, if you haven't seen this, to do so likewise. You can find us actually just by Googling DORA San Francisco, and this link will come up, and so I'd urge you to have a look and see whether you agree with these principles. Well, finally, it's one thing to complain about things and to write editorials. It's another thing to do something about it. And so 3 years ago, I was approached by 3 very important funding agencies to develop a new open access journal. I was first approached by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is a major funding agency for the very best in life science research in the US, but also by the Wellcome Trust in Britain and the Max Planck Society in Germany, who joined forces with considerable resources to create a new open access online journal that would appeal to the most important work at the high end and create an alternative venue where scholarship was evaluated, in the life sciences at least, by active scholars from around the world, moving away from the use of professional editors. This journal is called eLife. It's obviously not particularly relevant to this audience because it's a life science journal, but I believe the same thing could be done in the physical sciences. And it's unique in several respects. The first is that it's really the first example where the funders of science have decided to wrest control from commercial enterprises the publication of the most important work. The presidents of these organizations feel very strongly that the work of their scholars is being delayed and made more expensive by the use of impact factor as a tool to evaluate whether something is going to be important. Citation index may have its place when librarians decide about which journals to subscribe to for their libraries, but it has no role, I would say, in our ability to evaluate each other's scholarship. So we've developed a journal. It's supported by these organizations, though all editorial decisions are completely independent of these organizations. The editorial board consists of scholars from around the world, many of whom are not supported by these organizations. We are focused on developing unique ways of reviewing papers where scholars confer with each other and making decisions, and attempting to shortcut the lengthy review process that is characteristic of the most competitive journals. It is, as I said, a collaboration between funders and the research community. It's a digital publication, and we're seeking new ways to maximize the reach and influence of the most important papers in the life sciences. Now, of course, we want to be selective, but we don't want to be ridiculously selective. Science, Nature, and the Life Science Journal Cell accept fewer than 10% of the submissions that they receive. And this, I believe, is part of the pathology of the system, because young investigators strive to publish in these journals and often spend years and additional money in the vain effort to get their work published in these journals. But we have to be somewhat exclusive. We have to make decisions that are critical, sometimes of papers that are found not to be significant contributions, and of course that will upset some people. One such person who was greatly upset by a decision that we rendered against his work is the Nobel Laureate James Watson, the discoverer of the double helix. I had to reject a paper of his that we considered inadequate. He was quite offended by this. And last year, when he received an award from the American Association of Cancer Researchers, he decided to take me to task personally. He said, naming my name, that I hate the editors of these journals more than I hate Republicans. Now, for the Americans in the audience, those are strong words. And especially for me, I teach at UC Berkeley. I barely know any Republicans, but I'm guessing that this was an offensive remark. So I leave you with that. I believe that the physical sciences could also be challenged to create open access online journals to compete at the high level with those journals that view themselves as being somehow exclusive and where the decisions are made on the basis of potential numbers of citations. I think this is a serious flaw in our scholarship, and I would urge you to embrace the idea that the literature should be open for all to see and should be published when they present new and challenging results and not necessarily those that are going to generate lots of citations. Thank you for your attention.